So most presenters will think about a title and then pick their graphics to match, right? That's not how I work. I use Google to search graphics, and I use that as a springboard. So I found this picture and thought it was wonderful. I just loved this picture, and then from there, I created my. So VRI, it's relatively new technology. People aren't fully accustomed to using the technology. And I've worked to try to find ways that this technology can fit my needs, our needs. So VRI will eventually be. So I've been thinking about different avenues of access for communication. And I came up with several that I'd like to briefly mention and compare them to VRI. Now, this is not all-inclusive. There's text, discussion, other speech, foreign language use. So these are just So I have a question. Right, with paper and pen. How many of you have that today ready with you to communicate? Now, being a hearing person, this is not personal experience, but I have heard many anecdotes about people carrying pen and paper. Now, especially in years past, deaf people would make it common practice to have just a piece of, If it's short communication, I think this is effective. Asking simple questions such as, where's the interpreter? And then the response can be given via paper and pen effectively. Or asking where the restroom is, something of that nature. On the other hand, if there's more extensive communication related to government contracting or GSA, which requires a lot more explanation, that can be very complex and very complicated, therefore not an effective time to use pen and paper. This may also be in a medical situation where very complex information is communicated. Often a doctor will condense information because they're writing it so that you don't get everything. It's not equal access. I know one doctor, I was interpreting, standing out in the hallway, and the doctor walked by, glanced at me, recognized that I was an interpreter, looked at the nurse and said, why do we need an interpreter? I like the deaf patient, it's easy, we don't have to explain too much. So he preferred working with a deaf patient because he didn't have to get into too much detail. Okay, wait a minute, that's not equal access. And wasn't effective. So remember this, right? Who remembers the TTYs? Right? Pretty old technology. Do you remember the large ones? The very first time I saw one, I had no idea what it was. I had a deaf friend come up and start pecking away at the keys. And so I went up to take a closer look, and then she explained to me that it was actually a device to make phone calls. I mean, if you had one of these in your living room or kitchen, yeah. So TTYs did impact the deaf community, right? Communication access was improved, right? It went from having to actually get in the car and drive to somebody's house to communicate. It went from that to being able to place a call through a TTY. So it was effective, but it was this large monster of a machine. Right, you couldn't, it wasn't portable, you couldn't carry it around. Then they became smaller, and that was much better. However, there were still some ineffective uses, right, during a doctor's appointment, for instance. Also remember calling assistants. As a call assistant, they would place a call for a TTY user, and then go into spoken language from that. And I remember, as a hearing consumer on the other end of the phone, often you would hear, "Hello, Sue. Do you want me to pick you up?" And then I would answer, oh, and you have to end with GA, right? So, GA, go ahead. And the hearing person on the other side might say, yes, but if it was before the GA was uttered, the CA would insert the comment, caller is still typing, right? And then after GA, then you can say yes and give your response. So VRS, right, this is great new technology. Now, this was a little awkward when we first had the technology start, right? What do you think? Some of you feel like it was a little awkward? Okay. So yeah, when it was new technology, we had to figure it out. We had to figure out how to use it, how to best use the technology. But VRS was used for phone calls, and that was it, for video phone calls, right? And the FCC was the monitoring agency. So there's a question here. Wait, actually, as a presenter, I would like to ask, for me to feel comfortable, I need a little more interaction, okay? So, because I'm looking out and I'm seeing friends, and I feel comfortable, and that's nice, I can ask you to help me out, okay? So, please, I would love your interaction. Okay, now let me get back. All right, so, VRS. I lost my train of thought. Oh yes, okay, it's back. So, VRS. I worked at Sorensen for many years. And I noticed there were a lot of deaf people that thought all interpreters who were working in VRS were certified, right? Is that true?
Oh yeah, okay.
Do you believe them? No, it's not true. All VRS interpreters are not certified. If you didn't know that, there you go. At my center in Iowa, maybe 50% are certified. So anyway, VRS, the FCC is monitoring it, right? So people assume, well then all interpreters are certified, all interpreters are qualified. Well, it's not the case. So just keep that in the back of your mind. captioning. Yes, like we have Chuck doing. It's effective. It's English-based. It's the English mode. For some deaf people who don't use ASL, this is a very effective communication mode. It's still English, though. That's the important piece, as is the TT. So it's effective for many different settings. Religious settings, classroom, medical, workplace. There are a number of settings that this can be effective in. We have one situation where a deaf person is from northern Iowa and often goes to medical appointments. That's not sign at all. Is an English user and reads English. So for 6 months, the deaf person would struggle with the doctor, did not understand his medical situation, the staff, the doctors, became very frustrated. And what was neat was the medical staff contacted our company and our Hands Up communication agency, asking about what they could do. And we suggested the idea of real-time captioning. They were open to the idea. And the first time we sent a captionist to a medical appointment, the appointment went very smoothly, very effectively. And at the end of the appointment, the hospital called and said, and expressed their gratitude and have ever since utilized captioning services. Now, this person is completely deaf, but is not an ASL user, is not a sign language user. Which then it gets to, if it's a person who is an ASL user, this would not be effective. They would then need more visual communication, visual language. And that would be my case, right? I'm more of a visual person. But there are some times that a team and I will work together, right? And that person can give me some of that text information or linear information because I'm a more visual learner. So it's great. Where there's a team that I have that she's, does well with text, so then we can work together. She can summarize it for me, and then that helps me out. If it's a large audience with a number of people in attendance, or a classroom with small group discussions, where there are people who are having multiple conversations at the same time, captioning, if the captionist is in the classroom, that may be effective, but if it's remote, then those kinds of settings can be very challenging. It requires speakers. This would be the preference, to have a live, in-person interpreter. So with the old RID organization, do you know the age of RID? Does anybody know? The birth of RID was the same year I was born, 1964. I think that's pretty cool. But interpreting became popular around the 70s. Interpreter training programs started to pop up in the States around then. Before the 70s,
be a 6-week or an 8-week course, likely just memorization of vocabulary at that time. And then off these interpreters were sent to do the work. So, if you are a sign language user, then effective communication with an interpreter, the doctor, a church, in a religious setting, legal and such, would be considered effective. But is it always effective? Sometimes the interpreter just doesn't have the skills. Sometimes they don't have the training. And in those situations, you've probably come about enough of those to know that it is not effective. Right? Would you concur that this is not a good fit or a good situation? If in fact it's not a good fit between the deaf person and the interpreter, what do you do? Anybody have any response to that? If you have an interpreter that just does not meet your needs, what happens? So I'm seeing somebody say they're asking for another interpreter then. What other kinds of responses do you have? So somebody's saying that they'll have to ask the interpreter to repeat. Maybe the interpreter has very basic skills. So that means that they need to further their education sometimes. Absolutely. I would agree with that. I believe that interpreter training does not have an end date. There just is not a completion of a trained interpreter. That is a continued process throughout the career, period. Languages are not stagnant, and they are ever changing. But before technology, I mean, if I were to talk about the iPhone or texting or something like that right now, that's perfectly understandable. We all share that. But that's you. Deaf people often for medical appointments experience a no-show, where the interpreter just does not show up. And I've had, deaf people call my office and say, up until this point, I haven't had interpreters, and I am facing surgery at this point in time. I really don't know what to do. We can often refer them to a state agency so that they can receive some advocacy, so that they can come in and meet with the doctor. They can, and if the appointment is coming up, we could see if we could get an interpreter out, get them to the office. We are often met with no, it's not going to work, it's not possible, we're going to need somebody to volunteer, and we will go into the office, meet with the doctor, meet with the family. it an interpretation error? So then I tried to clarify. The patient maintains that this was a injury that happened at work. And then the family responds again. No, this is a procedure due to cancer. So, interpreter then clarifies. So, you understand that the procedure is to remove cancer. And you know what? That patient at that point in time, because up until this point in time, they've had no interpreter, had no idea that they in fact had cancer. How heartbreaking is that? To know that they had no access to communication thus far in this medical progression. And if we don't have an effective interpreter, we don't have an effective interpretation. And I mean, you don't have an interpreter with you at home. You don't take your interpreter with you on vacation. I mean, if you do, I'm happy to go with you. Any of you world travelers out there need an interpreter? Sue Tyrrell, she's okay. Now, VRI, video remote interpreter. We talked about VRS, that is the telephone conversation. Where that ends, VRI begins. And there are
So I will respond to that next. These are all the pros for the use of VRI. Quality, for example. In Iowa, up in the northern region of the state, there are not very many qualified interpreters. So if you wanted to get a certified interpreter from Cedar Rapids or from Des Moines, each would be about equidistance to travel to that area of the state in order to provide services. But there are not very many qualified interpreters who reside in that area of the state. So this might provide more opportunity to get qualified interpreters. More resources for you. The cost for an interpreter to travel 2.5 hours to interpret for 15 minutes and then travel back 2.5 hours is going to result in a 6-hour charge for interpreting services. If you were to use VRI, the cost would be significantly less. For VRI, the cost per minute is higher than it is if you had an in-person interpreter, but since you are only using 15 minutes of service, it becomes much less. In talking about access, this provides and VRI is not perfect. And there are many reasons why you would not use it.
So I would say that, like before, you mentioned northern Iowa having, some deaf people in that area, and it would be likely that the deaf person and the interpreters are very familiar with one another. So I think VRI in that situation offers a lot more anonymity
I have a friend in California, and I was asking some opinions of what they think about VRI. And my friend in California said, I really love it. And I said, why? And my friend said, it's private. I found one company that I feel like is a great fit for me, and the VRI interpreters are certified, they're qualified, I feel comfortable with them, I trust them, and that's the company I use instead of using the local people. I like using VRI. So that person agrees with you that there's more private. We wouldn't want to use a VRI for a wedding, right? That would not be effective. However, there is one story. I have 4 children. When my grandmother was 84, she was not able to come to my second child's wedding, or the third, but for the 4th, my grandmother wanted to come but couldn't because of medical reasons. She was ill and she was getting close to death, and so she was able to go into the office, pick up my computer, and I got that set up, I did rather, and my grandmother was at home, and my father was there to explain everything on the phone of how to get everything connected. And then she was able to watch on a screen the wedding. Now, she couldn't see everything that was happening in the room, but it was really neat that she was able to see the wedding. And she was able to see all 4 of the kids get married. And so that could be something that's beneficial not only for the deaf community, but also for my grandmother, who is rather hard of hearing. And as she got closer to death, she became more and more deaf. You probably wouldn't want to use VRI for a funeral. Cognitive issues. If a person has mental challenges, mental issues, cognitive issues, VRI might not be a good accommodation. If the person is in an altered state medically, it's hard enough to follow a live interpreter on site with the patient, much more. One problem that we do face is technical. In my office, we have a very strong connection. But if the doctor's office is using Wi-Fi, then sometimes that causes disruptions in the connection. Most of the time, everything runs smoothly and goes very well, most of the time. But still, it is possible that there are technological issues. And of course, it requires internet access. And VRI is not a good choice if you don't want it. That's pretty simple. But if you don't want to use VRI, if you want an on-site interpreter, then that's what you want. Somebody said before that we have a right to choose. We have a right to those options. And if they are trying to force you to use VRI, then that probably is not going to be successful. I mentioned VRI a lot before. What we're doing in Iowa is, I run an agency called Hands Up Communications. In Des Moines, we have an agency that's called EFR, Employee and Family Resources. And then there's another agency, no, it's a hospital actually, and that's Mercy Hospital. And Hayes Interpreter Services, or Interpreting Services, and that's an agency. We came together to collaborate about VRI. We knew that clearly VRI was here to stay. If you search on the internet, you'll find many, many different companies that are providing VRI. For us in Iowa, we didn't want companies from hither and yon to come in and try to take over VRI in the state. We didn't want that. Because we thought, how can these outside companies really know the needs and the concerns of those in Iowa? And speaking for myself, I feel like the Iowa community has its own, is a community of its own. So if other companies want to run VRI only, then their concern is billable minutes. VRI Iowa believes in options for deaf people. If you connect through VRI and then the deaf person says, I really would rather have an on-site interpreter, then we support that. And we support their request. We voice that request then to those who are present, to the medical staff. And we hope that they then will in turn contact an on-site interpreter to come and interpret. We'll have someone that will travel and arrive there, and once they do, and the VRI interpreter sees that interpreter arrive on site, they can debrief as to what's occurred so far, and then the on-site interpreter can continue the interpretation of the appointment. So I wanted to explain, if you need an interpreter, you see where the dot is there, it's Fort Dodge. And another interpreter is needed up in Decorah. And then another interpreter is needed in Ames. Interpreters often travel again, maybe some people, we may run out of interpreters or run out of resources, and they may go without. Because we partner with those in Des Moines, our agency works together closely with them, and we want to support each other in providing interpreters as best we can.
I personally feel the best use for VRI is for the interim, right? If a person wants an on-site interpreter, then they can use VRI to place that request. And then once the interpreter arrives, they disconnect from VRI. It could be a good use for office settings, perhaps a last-minute meeting that's called. right? That could be an effective use. Emergency, this is a tough one. If there's an emergency for a deaf person, they're in the emergency room, sitting in the waiting room, right? First they have to be admitted, they make a request for an interpreter, and they tend to be stuck waiting. Maybe the staff member has called an interpreter, it could be 2 o'clock in the morning. It might take the interpreter a little while to wake up, right? And get there, get themselves presentable and arrive. It could be an hour later, perhaps even an hour and a half later, depending on the location of the interpreter from the hospital. So while that deaf patient is waiting in the waiting room, there are other patients that arrive who are not deaf and get called in to be seen before them. That deaf person is left waiting. Now that's not fair. If you could check in and have VRI interpreting services available upon admission, and at that moment request an on-site interpreter, then you at least have that continuous service. So at least your care could be started until an on-site interpreter arrives. Rural areas. This is where I feel VRI is the most beneficial. There are many rural areas where they have very few interpreters available. And by few, maybe it's just one interpreter who's qualified, and there may be others who are signers, but not technically qualified to work as interpreters. So for those rural areas, VRI might be very beneficial if the connection is quick enough. So if somebody is in the hospital for a long stay, 2 or 3 days, VRI might be a great use for nurse checks, you know, for the shift changes that happen 2 or 3 times a day. VRI could be utilized for the nurse checks at those times, just for those very short periods of time, to check in, do a pain check, kind of check in with how many of you here, well, let me think, so how many of you think you just hate VRI? And I want your honest opinion. How many of you hate VRI? How many of you have used it? Okay, a few of you. How many have had positive experiences? How many have had negative experiences? Okay, so it's kind of mixed. If it was a negative experience, I would suggest you provide feedback. And feedback to that company that provided it, or the facility, the nurses or the doctor's office or the hospital. You need to share your feedback. It is so important, from my perspective. Communication access is something we have to support. We have to support interpreters as one of those means, but is it the only one? I think not. There was a woman that I met here in Missouri. She provided, Ella. who was president of Missouri Association of the Deaf, and I was very impressed by some of the things she said. She talked about how the numbers of deaf people who use interpreters is pretty small. So when a bill is wanting to be passed or some law to be enacted, that it looks like it's a very small population that that law would be used for. But if we collaborate, deaf, hard of hearing people, people who are aging, who have lost their hearing, people who work in the field, such as interpreters, if all of us collaborate, they see a much larger population and a much larger constituency that is related or impacted by that. So that 800,000 Missourians, right? Is that the correct number I have, Chris? 800,000? James?
The Missouri census, under the U.S. Census, their official estimation is 90,000 who are profoundly deaf, and approximately 250,000 who are deaf, including those who are hard of hearing, late deafened and such.
What about the aging population?
With the U.S. Census Bureau, they count those who self-identify as deaf.
So the 250,000 is a much larger number, right? And if that is what is posed to the government, it's much more powerful than the 90,000. So it's really important that we collaborate. We've got to work together. Another thing I've noticed in Missouri, your conferences, you have the Deaf Empowerment Symposium happening at the same time as the Interpreting Conference. That's wonderful. I truly believe the interpreting community, the deaf community, the hard of hearing community, aging community who are losing their hearing, all work together. You will see a lot more success. Another thing I'd like to say, if you need something, ask for it. So if you go into a medical office and you say, I need an interpreter, right, that could be framed differently. You're not the only one that needs the interpreter. The doctor needs the interpreter too. So change your language to we. We need an interpreter. Not just I need the interpreter. We need the interpreter for our communication to be effective. We need it. And if you're not satisfied with the interpreting services, whether it be about skills or the captioning services, any communication access that's given to you, share your feedback. That is so critical. I often will open meetings in our community by saying, please share your feedback with me. Let me know if there's something you're not happy with. You want our services to improve. You have to let me know. It's really, really important. If you want change, you become that change. So I believe strongly in this idea of collaboration. We've got to work together. For example, in my home area, Hands Up Communication, when we opened up We started with that philosophy. We started with that working together philosophy. And I believe that's really our team, the team, because we work together. So we have a pretty small community, but if you look at the larger surrounding community, the deaf and hard hearing and interpreting communities, and then the state community, the even larger community, it will have a ripple effect. We will eventually start to collaborate more and more. I was just talking about to James, and I was saying, well, you know, maybe you should help us in Iowa. And he said, yeah, we need to collaborate with you. Right, so he's not planning on keeping this only limited to Missouri. He also wants to reach out into the national community, so we've got to collaborate. In the end, it really becomes your choice. And as individuals, we need to do the best we can to become the change ourselves, to inform people, to share our needs with people, to let people know what we need. And if they don't get it, keep trying.